Well, Monica, we've been fascinated by Michael Jackson for a long time now. This guy has just been a rolling train wreck for years.
You know, I'll tell you, Ron, just when you think you've seen everything with regard to Michael Jackson, he pulls another stunt, shows up in his pajama bottoms in court. I'm not quite sure how well that went over with the judge and or the jury, Ron, but it really does point to this unending hunger we have in this country for celebrity.
It's true. On and on it goes. It started with, well, it didn't start with O.J. It probably started way back with witch burnings and things like that, but it certainly picked up steam with O.J. Simpson, and now we've got Michael Jackson.
And now we're in a 24-hour news cycle, and the beast is forever hungry. And here to talk to us about all of this, joining me now is John Bonet. He's an editor with msnbc.com. He's been covering the Michael Jackson trial for several weeks now.
And my guest is Michael Musto, entertainment columnist for The Village Voice. He's followed the King of Pop's career for years, and he joins us from New York.
Hi, guys. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
And Michael Musto, let me begin with you. So why the fascination with Michael Jackson's every move?
Well, way before he was a walking train wreck, he was a brilliant performer. Practically from birth, we were captivated by him, those of us old enough to remember the 60s. And in fact, he was a galvanizing lead singer of Jackson 5. In the 80s, he reinvented himself as the moonwalking star of the Motown special, singing Billie Jean and Beat It. He truly was the king of pop. He wasn't just insisting people call him that. They wanted to call him that. Ever since then, he's been fascinating just because of his behavior, his surgery, which redefines self-effacing. There's no facelift. And by the way, I think the pajamas could be his gap dress. I think somebody should do a DNA test on those immediately.
Well, you know, Michael, it's only those off. I mean, I'm sure they're going to be a hot new trend anytime
I'm already
soon.
wearing them.
Yeah.
I'm already wearing them.
So, John Bonet, do you agree with Michael Musto on this point about Michael Jackson in particular and our fascination with him, that it was the childhood stardom and then the adult superstardom and then, of course, the weirdness?
I think no question, and I think the weirdness has sort of superseded everything else and capped it off, and that's what's made it all that much more interesting, is that this guy who I think so many people grew up with really at some point seems to have gone off the rails.
Well, John, we've had a number of sort of high-profile trials. We've got Robert Blake. He doesn't seem to cause a lot of excitement here. What are the necessary ingredients for a real good old-fashioned media frenzy?
I think you need someone, obviously, who's still out there in the public eye somewhat, although as you look at Robert Blake or even O.J., they had sort of, there was a little bit of tarnish on their stars at the time, but I think then it's a matter of how they behave when they get to the courtroom and how they behave leading up to the trial. I think the O.J. Bronco chase sort of set the tone for everything else that followed, whereas Robert Blake has been kind of a sedate trial. I think even the Kobe Bryant hearings were relatively sedate, and you had defendants who sort of, they came well-dressed, quiet, and they kind of behaved themselves. They behaved sort of the way a typical defendant would, you would expect. And so they were probably somewhat more useful for the legal process, if not for our own interest.
Somebody ought to publish a set of rules for celebrities going to trial in terms of their behavior, and Michael Jackson would seem to be breaking most of those rules, at least today.
Pretty much, and I think the problem you get into is that he knows that the world is watching. He knows that there's all these dozens and dozens, hundreds of cameras out there watching him, and this is a man who just is driven to perform. And if you look at the way he acted, even at his arraignment, dancing on the SUV, or at the baby dangling episode, you know, every time that there are people watching, he can't resist, and I think that this is colliding with jurisprudence.
Michael, the E! Channel is doing these very campy nighttime recreations of what's going on every day in the courtroom. The media circus outside the courthouse continues. Do you think we've reached a new abyss here in terms of the media stampede?
Yes, I think it's absolutely appalling, and I watch it every night. You know what? We can't have cameras in the courtroom, unfortunately, in this case, so we have to watch actors portraying people, and that's fine with me. I'm glued to the set. Michael Jackson is an arrested child who some people should be arrested, and Robert Blake happened to have been a former child star himself, but in some levels he grew up, though he's accused of a hideous crime. But Michael Jackson's so endlessly fascinating that we can't really be mad at these recreations. So it's giving actors work.
It's more or less a voyeuristic element to all of this, right? It's like watching a train wreck happen.
Well, everything about Michael Jackson is screaming, don't look at me, but please look at me. He wears a gas mask as a disguise, and it makes you notice him twice as much. So the pajama thing was a new high of, I'm being casual, but please pay attention.
John, what do you think that all of this says about us? Us, the public, and us, the media, as well?
I think as far as the media goes, I think what it says is we love a good story, and we know that people are going to watch, and we know that when you have someone who's driven to perform on camera, and we've got the cameras, that there's kind of a synergistic marriage there. As far as what it says about everyone generally, I think it says the same thing that maybe the Jerry Springer shows did, and talk shows, all sorts of things. I think it makes us feel better that we go and we live our lives, and we've got this guy who is sort of part of our cultural firmament, and he's sort of gone, completely, as I said, off the rails, and we keep living our lives, and it gives us maybe a sense of perspective.
Mm-hmm. John, you wrote a really fascinating piece for msnbc.com a couple of weeks ago that caught my eye, and in it you said this trial is bigger than the O.J. Simpson trial, not because of the scale of the crime, but because of the scale of the celebrity. Tell us what you mean.
Well, it simply, I think in both cases, like I said, the stars had faded a little bit, but it's impossible to overestimate the cultural power that Michael Jackson has, and I think that he's completely different from O.J. I think that O.J. was sort of a B-list celebrity by the time that his trial happened. I think even though Michael Jackson, you can argue that he hasn't had huge hit albums lately, but that name has a power that I think is just unmatchable, and they exist differently, and I think they're hard to compare.